I'm Brittany Lewis with Forbes Breaking News. Joining me now is my colleague, Forbes staff writer, Zach Everson. Zach, thanks for coming on.
Thanks for having me on, Brittany. Happy New Year.
Happy New Year to you as well. You and your entire team are estimating the net worths of Supreme Court justices. Today, we are talking about Justice Clarence Thomas. But before you reveal the big number, I want you to walk it back a little bit. Take us to the very beginning, because in your story, you describe the justice as a, quote, genuine American success story. So tell us that story.
Yeah, I mean, he's really a rags to riches story, and obviously he is a very controversial justice. But I mean, this is objectively, it's a very impressive life story. He was born in 1948 in what he described as a shanty. It was his great aunt's house. There was no indoor plumbing. There was only one electric light. He moved. The house burned down. He moved to Savannah to live with his mom in what he called urban squalor. His life really took a turn when his mother dropped him and his brother off at his grandparents' house. They really stressed his education, spent the money, saved up and spent money to send him to Catholic school. So there's a lot of hard work that goes in there. But as you go through his memoir, he's also quick to point out that there's a lot of assistance that helped him along the way. Namely, his grandparents helping him out along that way. John Danforth, who was the Attorney General of Missouri, really helped him out a few times. But it is miraculous thinking about that, how this person born in a shanty in Georgia could be one of the highest ranking jurists in the United States.
It's really a story about the American dream, and an interesting thing that you pointed out just now, you also pointed it out in your story, is that he did receive a lot of help along the way. One of my favorite tidbits was from Ralph Nader himself, and this help from a lot of people along the way was in the ballpark of thousands of dollars. So can you talk about that for us a little bit?
Sure. The Nader one specifically, and this also came out of Thomas's memoir, and he pointed out the irony in this, is that Thomas was a bit short in paying for his son Jamal's tuition and needed some money, didn't have any credit, was pretty much maxed out, and all of a sudden got a notice in the mail that his Fiat had been recalled, and it was a recall that had been instigated by Ralph Nader's progressive policies, and that got Thomas a check for $2,000 that he was then able to sign over to pay for his son's tuition. But Thomas also talks about regularly having to borrow money from friends, small amounts that he would take. When cash got a little tight, he'd pay them back, only to have to borrow it again at the end of the month. Student loans, he had student loans all the way until he was on the Supreme Court, he says. And he talks about, it seems like he spent a little bit recklessly some places as well. He had a Camaro at one point, he had a Corvette. He and his first wife bought a house in St. Louis where the mortgage payments were about double what they'd been paying previously in rent. So there's a bit of that as well.
And when he was borrowing money from friends, from others, was he returning this money?
Yeah, I mean, best we can tell, he's paid off his debts. He has a house right now in suburban DC in the Virginia area. Nice setback away from prying eyes, and we valued it about $1.4 million. He owes $600,000 on it due to mortgage, the last mortgage we could find. But I mean, there's no signs that he hasn't paid back any of this. It's other than the outstanding mortgage.
And at one point he did note, or you noted that he said in his memoir that he was on the brink of financial ruin. So when did his tides turn?
He said that several times, actually, how he he regularly pointed out how difficult his life was, even as he was, in the 80s when he was working as a appointee of President Reagan. I mean, that obviously was a big turning point for him when President Reagan appointed him to the Department of Education, and then the following year put him in as the head of the Equal Employment Opportunity Commission. So he had a pretty high-ranking job, but even then he was had some difficulty financially. It sounds like it got better around the time that he met Virginia Lamp, who is his wife, famously Ginny Thomas, who worked to overturn the results of the 2020 presidential election. He mentioned there that they were looking to buy a house for the two of them and his son from his first marriage, Jamal, and they weren't sure if they could afford it, so they went to the house the night before. It was a construction site. They went before and prayed about it, and their prayers were answered when Ginny Lamp's family came through and gave them a little bit of money they were able to use on the mortgage. So from that point on through the rest of his memoir, which covers up until his appointment on the Supreme Court, he doesn't appear to mention any financial difficulties. Although clearly, from other reporting, it's clear that he has had some he's not making as much as he would have liked to for the rest of his career.